Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, January 13th, and 2025, and Colonel Jacques Baud is back with us. Welcome back, Colonel.
Thank you very much for inviting me again. And hello to everybody.
Let's get started with what's going on between Israel and Turkey. We Jerusalem Post reported, according to a government committee, that Israel must be prepared for a potential war with Turkey. On the other hand, they have some sort of issue with Egypt and the government there on Sinai. How do you see Israel right now after the fall of Assad? Are the things are getting more complicated for Israel?
Well, I think yes, and the problem is here that you have on both sides. I mean, Turkey side and Israeli side, and probably U.S. and British side as well, have kind of a short-sighted approach to this because for those who know the complexity of the Middle East, such a situation that we have today could be expected because we know that not everything is simple. You know, we have always this kind of what we say in French, ménage à trois. This is a household with three partners in some, and that's exactly the situation we have. And we have seen, first of all, that Turkey, since weeks, even months, have declared that they want to support the Palestinians. Erdogan indicated that, or he said that Turkey was ready to enter Israel if necessary. So that means that basically he was saying that he was ready to attack Israel. We had a couple of articles last month saying that the US should be at one point ready to kill Turks over Syria because there is this problem. Again, the problem of the Turks are the Kurds, but at the same time, the Kurds are supported by the US. So we see that we have a complex relationship. We have three allies, basically: Turkey, US, and Israel. Three allies, but with diverging interests. And this had been always known. I mean, nothing new there. So today you have the, of course, Turks at odds with the Kurds, which are supported by the Israeli and the US. You have Israel having extended its presence on Syrian territory. Just remind you that the Golan Heights are officially, according to international law, this is Syrian territory. And last month, Israel entered further into Syrian territory. So this has only exacerbated the situation. Jihadi are basically not in favor of Israel. So this is clear. Turkey supports the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but it's an alliance of circumstances, meaning that it was just for the purpose of toppling Bashar al-Assad. But I'm not sure that Turkey is fully on the same line as the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is ready to open discussions with Iran. That was said very recently. And so we have a situation that has been increasingly complexified in the last weeks. And the fact that Syria was an independent country that would offer to three of those actors a neutral ground, if you want. But Syria is no longer there as a state that we use to date, shared between different factions. So this situation was predictable. The problem is that Turkey has still claims against Israel regarding the Palestinians. Hayat al-Sham wants to have, they want to establish themselves as, let's say, stable uh, force in the region. Therefore, they are ready to develop relations with Iran and to bridge, to make like a bridge between Turkey and Iran, which is not completely absurd, since you have, in the framework of the BRICS, you had already some discussions for trade, I mean, negotiation about trade between Turkey and Iran. So we see that slowly the balance of force is being reshaped in the region, and obviously not in favor of Israel. And beyond the the friendship you may have between countries in the region, you have the whole behavior of Israel. Because, as I mentioned several times, regardless of what you feel about Israel, today Israel is behaving as a genocidal state or exterminatory policies and things like this. So how can you have normal relationship with a state that behave that way? And that adds to the complexity of the problem, because this goes much beyond the benefits you could have having good relationship with Israel. The problem is that politically it becomes inappropriate, if you want, to have good relations with Israel, you know. And that's probably also what is affecting um, US Israeli relationship. Remember that one of the factors why Kamala Harris lost the election, there are obviously other factors like the personality of Trump and the poor results of the Biden administration in terms of social and domestic policies and things like this. All that plays a role. But an important factor is the policy of the Biden administration towards Israel and the Palestinians, and especially as regards the application of international law and the support provided by the Biden administration to the policy of Israel. And today, Trump comes with a portion of his own population that he knows doesn't support Israel. So and cannot support, not because there is no tradition. Obviously, there are a traditional friendship between U.S. and Israel. The problem is that you cannot afford to mention that anymore because of the behavior of Israel. So, and you have the same situation that arises in the region. Israel becomes a country you don't want to be associated with. And I think the Israelis are discovering that. They haven't, surprisingly, they have not identified this in the last year. And today they are almost trapped in their own policies. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, we have mentioned Syria, and the other big neighbors, as you mentioned, the big neighbor of Israel is, of course, Egypt. And today, apparently, there are still rumors that Israel might be interested in having, let's put it that way, the Sinai Peninsula under control. Let's put it that way. This is not new. This has been mentioned already in October 2023 as a solution for the Gazan population, the Gazawi population, meaning that Israel would push all the Gazan population into Egypt, and then they would create a state or something like that in the Sinai Peninsula. And that's the reason why Egypt blocked completely the border, because they didn't want to have, because in fact what Israel was doing or wanted to do was to shift the Palestinian problem and to pass it to Egypt. And Egypt doesn't want to have this at all, because they know, as it happened, by the way, with Jordan in the 70s, or in the 60s and 70s, and with Lebanon in the 60s, that you had these refugees, Palestinian refugees, starting to make cross-border operation into Israel from their territories, and using Jordan and South Lebanon as sanctuary, if you want, to prepare their operations and attacking Israel. And that has led to the Black September in Jordan, and to the various invasions of South Lebanon. So Egypt doesn't want to find itself into this situation. And for that reason, Egypt resists the temptation of accepting the Palestinians and putting them into the Sinai. But apparently, Israel has not abandoned the idea. And I have seen reports, but probably 1 year ago, that Egypt was building fortifications and defenses along the border to the Sinai area. So apparently, Egypt was expecting somehow that Israel would, at certain point, attack Egypt in order to open the door and to make all the Palestinians go into Egypt. So it's not a new issue. This has been resurrected. I don't know why and how, but there are these rumors that come back about this possible evolution. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. Now, the Egyptians don't want to have the Palestinians for the reasons I explained before, but also because Egypt is a very fragile society. We have, since, in fact, the late 1920s, you have independence movements that are very much, let's say, pro-Arabic. It has been even pan-Arabic with Gamal Nasser. But it is essentially a nationalist movement which is very strong, that used to be spearheaded by the Muslim Brotherhood and in the beginning of the 20th century. Muslim Brotherhood has been expelled. They went in other areas, and you had them in Syria. They were expelled from Syria, and they ended up to be in Turkey. So we have again Turkey in this area. The thing is that the Muslim Brotherhood has never completely left Egypt. It has a presence, and there are different factions within this movement. You have a more, let's say, political or mainstream faction, if you want, that is represented at, or used to be represented. I don't know if they are still represented in the Egyptian parliament, but they used to be. And you have a more nationalist faction, which is obviously not mainstream and probably more extreme. But it still exists. It's still there. And in the 2011, 2012, as you had the revolution in Egypt, it was obviously these nationalist faction of the Muslim Brotherhood, or probably even if it didn't had this name, it was affiliated to the ideology that eventually led to the presidency of Mr. Morsi, who was later removed and replaced by General Sisi, or Marshal Sisi. So now we have a situation that is, it seems to be stable, because the government, the Egyptian government, has established good relationship with the West, especially with the US, and therefore you have an apparent stability. But if you go deeper into the society, I think there is a lot of potential instability. And if you had Palestinians pouring into the Sinai area, that means in Egypt, that would probably resurrect these nationalist factions and destabilize significantly the country. And that's also the reason why the Egyptian government is resisting the temptation of having the Palestinians on its territory. By the way, it also knows that Palestinian resistance is fighting for Palestine. It's not fighting to have a territory. They want to have their territory. And that's very important also to understand. So, meaning that even if you have Palestinians in the Sinai Peninsula, they will still have claims over the rest. And the problem, in fact, would the Palestinian problem will not be solved. The Israeli would just kick the can down the road. That's the only thing they would do, because they are not solving the problem. Palestine needs to have a solution in Palestine. Period. And that's exactly what everybody in the region understands. I think even the Israeli understands that, but let's say Israelis understand that, but don't want to acknowledge it because it's an inconfrontable truth. So that's, in a nutshell, that's a little bit the situation. So what happened in Syria in December, in fact, just simply destabilize further the region, and destabilize in not in favor of Israel. Israel has always been interested in having Balkanized Syria. That's the famous, I think I mentioned that on your channel several times. This was the plan of Aded Yinon in the late 80s that gave birth to this text or report named A Clean Break, that used to be made in for the Benjamin Netanyahu already in the late 90s. And it has been kind of a playbook for what should happen to Syria. And that's exactly what we saw happening in 2012 or 2011, 2012. And that's exactly what, by the way, this DIA report dated of August 2012 was saying, that it was an opportunity to create out of Syria 3 different entities, an Alawi entity on the west, a Kurdish entity on the east, and a Salafi entity in the south. And that was the idea, to have split Syria. But the issue was that Israel thought that by having a split Syria, this was just create incentive for having these different factions fighting each other, and in that sense not being a threat to Israel. And that's why you had those declaration of the Israeli chief of staff at the time saying that they would prefer to have ISIS in Syria than Iran, for instance. So saying the Shiite government, or Shiite or pro-Iranian government. But the situation has changed, and even if Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is essentially a Sunni movement. Now they want to reestablish some kind of good relationship with its neighbors. And that includes Iraq, and that includes Iran. So the situation that Israel hoped to be a situation of, let's say, a chaos in order to preserve the security of Israel, this chaos is turning into an organized alliance against Israel. And and of course, everything Israel has done in the last year has contributed to that, because, as I said before, how can you have normal relationship with a country that performs daily violations of international humanitarian law, that is um, accused, it's not yet decided by the International Court of Justice, but accused of performing a genocide. So you cannot have a good relationship with such a country. And in fact, what Israel has done in the last year is to show that the problem in the region is Israel, not the others. That's in fact what the conclusion you can draw from what we have seen. The problem is Israel and the way it behaves with its neighbors. It has attacked all its neighbors. It still continued to attack its neighbors. It has signed a ceasefire agreement. It asked for a ceasefire agreement, a ceasefire with Lebanon, but it's not respecting it. Now, in a couple of days, Israel should completely withdraw from Lebanon, but based on report of the UNIFIL, I mean the UN interim force in Lebanon, apparently Israel is not preparing anything for its withdrawal. On the contrary, they have multiplied destruction since the signature of the ceasefire. They have proceeded further into Lebanese territory. So Israel is not abiding by the treaties or the agreements it's signed. So how can you have normal relationship with this country? And that's exactly what the picture that emerged after this year and almost and a half of war in Gaza and in Palestine at large. So I think the prospects are not very good. And Donald Trump, to come back to Trump doesn't want to be taken into this conflict. Trump's priority is to rebuild the US power, but from the inside. He has understood that US has expanded its presence all over the world, but has been weakened inside. It has not the industrial fabrics that it used to have, or let's say it has lost significance as compared to what China, for instance, is doing, and so on. So he wants to rebuild the US power from the inside. And that's why he wants to relocate production inside the US territory and so on and so forth. So that's his priority. And that's why he doesn't want to be distracted and not even have resources distracted by the conflict in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And for that reason, Trump wants to get rid of this conflict, or at least to have a solution, probably temporary, because I'm not sure it will solve the problem in Palestine, but at least he could have a temporary solution in the Middle East in order to focus its attention on the reconstruction of the U.S. That's I think the what we can say about this complex situation that we have today.
When getting back to the main question, that which was Israelis being prepared to fight with Turkey. If you look at the Israeli army today, the way that they have been fighting Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, right now they're talking about Turkey. How powerful, how mighty is their army? It seems to me that in their mind, the picture they have of their army is so exaggerated and unrealistic, or maybe they are counting on the United States Army to be under par, because the situation with Turkey would be much more different from what we've seen so far between Israel and Iran, or Israel and other Hezbollah or Hamas. Here
Well,
comes the question, why are they talking about this? Is that possible? Because the size of the population in Israel, you look at the size of the population, 9, 10 million, and the size of Turkey or Iran, much bigger, and geographically, and the size of the population in these countries, it's not even comparable to Israel. But at the end of the day, it seems to me that they're thinking that they're capable of defeating these nations.
well, the thing is, the size of the population, to start with that, is it may not be an indication. Look at the size of Gaza versus Israel, and Gaza is winning. What, at the end of the day, what is the key aspect is the determination, the willingness to fight. And that's the whole thing. Palestinians since 1948 have never gave up the idea of recovering their territory, and you still see this willingness to fight. And the very recent incident that you had in the Gaza Strip in Beit Hanun, for instance, which is in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, which has been invaded several times by the Israeli Defense Forces, and you still have now the biggest ambushes performed by the Palestinians against the Israelis. And they even launched last week. They even launched the missiles from Beit Hanun onto Jerusalem. So that requires very big missiles, not the small rockets that they use to fire. Meaning that despite the fact that this area has been destroyed several times by Israel, the Palestinian resistance still finds space to act and to have success in this area. So the size is not the main factor here. You may have probably today a lot of people thinking that it's not worth fighting for Israel since Israel doesn't behave as it should. You see, so, and that's probably the problem we can see in the Israeli army today. Why you have so many people defecting from the IDF? Why you have even a former chief of the general staff saying that Israel, the Israeli army, has performed illegal activities and should refuse orders. So you have now a kind of a identity crisis within the IDF. Now, IDF was created, structured, and organized as a conventional force. You see, it was organized as a force in order to fight against Syria, Egypt, and so on. Basically, it is an army that was created to fight the wars we had on the 20th century. The 1967 war, the 1973 war, Even the 1982 war was probably the war too much, because here we had the first use of Israel, of the IDF, against an unconventional enemy. And that started to be a problem for Israel. The problem is that the Israeli army has never really adjusted to that. They have developed special forces, they have developed some unconventional warfare capabilities, but the army as such, the armed forces, are still configured as a conventional army. In that sense, it can be better suited to fight against the Turks than against Palestinians or Hezbollah, for instance. And we have seen in 2006, and we have seen now today, even if the offensive has been for a longer time here in South Lebanon, we see that they don't achieve much success. They kill a lot of people, yes. They have achieved some success in killing people in the command structure, but they never defeated the organization. They have never been able to defeat the structure, because again, it's a kind of asymmetric war in which you the doctrine, the Israeli doctrine, has not really been adjusted to the doctrine that is implemented by the Palestinian in Gaza, for instance, but also the Hezbollah in the north. As a result, they are not able to compete on the same foot, if you want. The problem with Iran is a little bit different, because here we are talking about a kind of a duel between missile exchanges. So it's a little bit different. But coming back to the argument of Turkey, so the Israeli army is probably better suited to fight the Turkish army, because Turkish army is also organized as a conventional army. It's a NATO army that is, and it's a very brave army, by the way. The Turks have a very strong reputation of very good fighters, tenacious fighters. I mean, I have known people who used to fight in the Korean War, where you had the Turks, and the Turks were considered as the bravest fighter that you had in Korea, for instance. And I'm not sure if it applies also to the war against the Kurds, but nevertheless, it is an army of very good fighters. They have very good leadership in the Turkish army. I used to work with Turks when I was in NATO, and you can see that these guys they have a very high quality of in the command structure. They have a high quality of fighters, and therefore, if Turkey wants to attack Israel, I would say that even if the Israeli army is better suited to fight the Turks, I'm not sure the readiness for fighting in Israel is as strong. I mean, again, we cannot, let's say, speculate, because if Turkey would attack Israel, then probably the sense of the Israeli of defending their territory, their own territory, a place where they consider they have no other place to go. Therefore, this could stimulate determination and the willingness to defend. So it's very hard to say. But let's say fighting against the Turk, as seen from Israel, is a challenge, and a completely different challenge as fighting from Hezbollah. Remember that Hezbollah never wanted to destroy Israel. And even the Palestinians don't want to destroy Israel. They just want to recover their territory. But if you have a country like Turkey coming into Israel, then they might have other objectives. So this is a situation. I think Israel had put itself into a very peculiar situation. It has always increase the number of its enemies. I mean, Israel is a country which is very good at generating enemies. It's not because people don't like the Jews. I mean, that's the anti-Semitic excuse is always the one that you hear when you talk about it. It's nothing to do with that. It's the behavior of Israel, not the nature of its population. This is the behavior that creates a sense that Israel is a problem in the region. And this has obviously increased in the last 1 year and a half. So uh, I don't know what could be the result of a fighting in Israel by Turkey. I'm not sure that uh, Turkey, by the way, wants to go beyond rhetoric when it threatens Israel. I think it's part also of the game that you have in the Middle East. A lot goes through the rhetoric more than in the facts. And my view is that when Erdogan says it is ready to intervene in Israel, we should probably more see um, a rhetorical aspect of war rather than a preparedness for war. From the Israeli side, it's different. They don't have this mentality. They have a European mentality. So, meaning that you do things rather than you say things. While in the Middle East, you tend to say things before doing things, and it's also something that also in the Muslim mentality that the intent or intention is more important than what you want to do, what you do. That's a very important, let's say, cultural factor that explains all the rhetoric that you hear in the Middle East. I mean, at every level, that can be also at personal level and things like this. People uh, say things, but doesn't mean they will do things. And the Israeli, on the other hand, tend to do before they say. So that this is kind of a asymmetrical, let's say, situation in terms not just in terms of war, but in terms of conflict. That the Israelis have a European mentality. This is also something which sounds contradictory because Israel says that they are here since 2,000 years and things like that. It's not true. They have a European mentality. They act, react, and think like Europeans, as opposed to all the rest of the region. And that makes a big difference, meaning that if the Turks say they are ready to invade Israel, it doesn't mean they will do it. They are just expressing an intent. And based on that intent, they probably want to open a dialogue. And I mean, I would understand what Erdogan said more in that direction. It's more like an indication that he wants to open a dialogue with Israel rather than a mere threat to Israel. So it's a little bit in that sense. But it's sometimes very difficult to understand for those who are not familiar with the region and the mindset of the region. When you for those who have been in the region, you will feel that this is the willingness to talk is much more present in the region than it is in people with the European mentality. And that's exactly what you see with Israel. This is you cannot talk, in fact, to Israel because they don't pay attention to what you say. They just act. They will destroy what they consider as enemy, and period. There is, all the agreements that Israel has signed or agreed upon on several occasions. They have always, let's say, breached those agreements, always. And we don't know yet about the ceasefire in Lebanon, but there are apparently already rumors that Israel wants to extend that ceasefire, meaning that they promised they would leave into 60 days, but apparently they will not be able to do so. So this is a permanent thing. The for the Israelis, acting or the action is more important than words, while for the neighbors, words are probably sometimes more important than acts.
Before shifting to the conflict in Ukraine, Carl, you, we talked about it before coming to the live. Donald Trump has shared a video of Jeffrey Sachs in which he's talking about Netanyahu and his role for these endless wars in the Middle East, in the West Asia. And on one hand, he's talking to be tough on the issue with Palestinians. He wants to bring a hell to Gazans, to people in the West Bank. I don't know what else they can bring to these people because it's already a hell. It's a hellish situation in there. And on the other hand, he's trying to put some sort of pressure on Netanyahu. Is that part of the strategy that Trump has in his mind, and how different Trump would be from what we've seen so far from Joe Biden and his administration, in your opinion?
Well, it's exactly what I said before. Trump doesn't want to be involved in those conflicts anymore. Again, he was elected on a very a simple program, in fact, Make America Great Again. And this will not be done by military presence or making war. He considers, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, but probably rightly, by the way, that war is just a waste of money. And you can achieve other results with other means. And probably in his mind, economic or trade wars, sanctions, and all that are probably more successful, or let's say more useful, than waging physical wars. So Trump doesn't like the Palestinians. He considers them as terrorists and all that. He said that many times. And in that sense, he supports Israel. But at the same time, he doesn't want to be involved in a conflict that at the end of the day is again, I use the word genocidal, even if the word genocide has not been settled by the International Justice Court of Justice. But in essence, it's a little bit that. He doesn't want to be taken into a conflict which has a genocidal content or element. And he will continue to support Israel. I think this is no question. But he doesn't want to support wars performed by Israel, whether it is a war against Iran or a war against Palestinians or other wars. He would like to settle the situation as it is in Israel. I don't know how, and I'm not sure he knows or he has an idea how to settle that. But he doesn't want to expand conflicts and to be more involved, because he knows that if there is a conflict with Iran, let's say, or if you have you expand the conflict with Egypt or whatever, then the U.S. will be involved somehow, and that's what he doesn't want. So it may seem contradictory, but again, Trump is not pro-Palestinian. He's rather pro-Israeli, but he doesn't want to be involved in a conflict. And that's exactly the same thing with Ukraine. I don't think Trump likes the Russians. And he also understands that the rapprochement that we had between Russia and China goes against its own objectives. So he's not in favor of Russia, but he sees that what we are doing in Ukraine is totally counterproductive. So it's a pragmatic approach. It's not an ideological approach. And for that reason, I think Trump could be an opportunity for the region, provided the Israelis understand that. The problem is that the Israelis, especially in the configuration we have today in the government, that we have extremists and religiously extremists that do not think in rational terms. They still think in biblical terms. That's why for them intervening in Syria, for instance, the idea of attacking Damascus and all that makes sense for them, because it goes in the same direction of what is written in the Bible. They use the Bible as a playbook somehow, instead of taking the Bible as it should be, that is a guide for thinking, for the let's say for the intellectual. It's a intellectual food. It's not a playbook for politics, and that's a little bit the problem, that you have people, they take the text strictly and they want to apply this strictly, and that could lead to a self-destruction, in fact, of Israel at the end. So this is what is dangerous. Irrationality of the leadership in Israel is, in fact, what is most dangerous. And Netanyahu plays with that. He's probably more rational than the others like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but he plays with that because it goes in his own direction. So he used that or misused that. So Trump is a realistic man, I think, with all the good and bad aspects. Trump understands that the grandeur, or let's say the importance or the power of the US, cannot be just based on just suppressing the other peoples. US, as I told you before, there are two ways of standing out of the crowd. The best one is when you raise yourself above the crowd, because you are innovative, because you are creative, because you are more, let's say, you have a better competition position, or you create something, you are better than the others, and then you raise yourself above the crowd. The other way is, it's exactly what Biden has done. Instead of raising yourself, you just suppress the others, and you try to make the others lower than you. That's exactly the policy that was applied by the predecessors, I mean, Biden in particular. So Trump has this idea that it should raise US or the USA above the crowd. And that means concentrating its effort on the continental US. And for that reason, he doesn't want, as I said before, he doesn't want to be distracted by those conflicts that at the end of the day are not in favor of the US. They are just a liability for the US, not a gain. And that, I think, this is if I could, as seen from today, if I could summarize his doctrine, I mean, we know that all the presidents have a doctrine. I would say this would be the Trump doctrine, that you raise yourself above the others by improving yourself rather than suppressing the others. For the others, there is not much change, because at the end of the day, what Trump is looking for is still to have this kind of US hegemony on the rest. Instead of using weapons and military presence, he will probably use more sanctions, a trade war, economic war, and things like this. And that's what he promised, by the way, by raising tariffs and all that. But at the same time, this is a war that happens at another level than the level of the armies and the number of bombs you deliver here and there. So that may be an opportunity for the people in the region. That may be an opportunity for the Ukrainians. That may be an opportunity for the Palestinians or even the Israelis. But we are talking about managing supremacy with different tools somehow.
We have Mike Waltz, the Trump's man to replace Jake Sullivan in Washington, talking about reducing the drafting age of Ukrainian army from 25 to 18. He suggested that in an interview he had. And when you look at the strategy of the coming administration, Trump administration, and compare it with the Biden's one, and it seems to me that the strategy on the part of Biden was the continuation of the conflict by reducing the age from 25 to 18. But the Trump administration sees this as a bargaining process, and they can put Ukraine in a better position. But the fear of this sort of strategy is they can bring much more death, much more destruction to Ukraine. And how long does it take this bargaining process? How long does it take for the Trump administration to come to some sort of acceptable terms for Ukraine? We still don't know what do they want to do, because with the proposal coming from Keith Kellogg, which was totally unrealistic, and right now they're asking the same sort of policy that the Biden administration has been implementing for more than, you're approaching 3 years of the conflict, 3 years of the conflict in Ukraine. Well, how do you see the current phase of the conflict between Russia and the United States? On the other hand, Financial Times reported that the Russian army approaches the Dnipropetrovsk region. It seems that they're advancing on the main line of the conflict.
Well, the name of the game today for the West is how to be defeated without losing face. This is the problem. And because the situation on the ground is definitely in favor of Russia, if you start a negotiation process, you have to take Russia into account, period. And I go even further by saying that you cannot avoid having a discussion based on Russia's terms. So that's inevitable. You can probably, on different aspects, you can probably negotiate some aspects that will help you to save face. And that's very true for Ukrainians. This is for Zelensky, probably more than Ukrainians themselves, because I think the Ukrainian population understands perfectly where they are, but the leadership doesn't want to acknowledge it. So therefore, we're talking about Zelensky and leadership. The European Union, because the European Union has focused its policy on supporting Ukraine regardless of the situation. And to say that that was a constant narrative that Russia cannot win. So that's European policy, and there is no sign that they want to change that. And now you have the Americans who are there, and they don't like to be associated to a defeat. That would contradict the idea of making America great again. So they have to find a way to go out of the conflict without appearing to be defeated somehow. And they have, the problem is that the West at large, US in particular, have put so much rhetoric, so much weapons, so much money into the conflict that today it will be hard for them to get out of the conflict without having the sense of being defeated. This is what the German poet used to say, Goethe used to say, the higher the mountain, the deeper the valley. So the more you think you are high, the more deeper is the valley when you fall. And that's exactly in which situation the West is. They have said so many times that Ukraine will win, that Russia cannot win, will lose, and so on, that the defeat will be even uh, uh, more brutal than it is in reality. So that's the name of the game for the West. Now, for the Russians, the problem is that the Russians, now that they proceed, they will go up to Dnipropetrovsk and all that probably, but they know that they don't want to go on the western part of Ukraine. They never had in mind to take the whole of the Ukrainian territory. So they will have to stop somewhere. They know that, because occupying the western part of Ukraine will be just impossible. That would be a war that will last for decades. Remember that the Soviets experienced that from the end of World War II up to the early 60s, that you had a guerrilla there sponsored by the West, by the way, or the Western intelligence, like the French, the UK, and US intelligence in this region. And what you have today, the leadership in Ukraine, are in fact those who come out of the support they received in the 60s. These are the same ones. So the Russians don't want to get caught into such a guerrilla warfare or type of resistance warfare in the western part of the country. So you will have a kind of optimal situation, or you should have an optimal situation. On the one hand, the Ukrainians cannot accept, or will have, they will try to keep a minimal viable Ukraine, and the Russians on their side don't want to take the whole of Ukraine. So there is an optimum that will be decided on the ground if there are no negotiations before. The more we wait on negotiations, the more or the less territory this Ukraine will have, basically. And I'm not sure the Russians will achieve total destruction, as Viktor Orban predicted. He said that this conflict can only end with either the destruction of one of the parties, which in this case could be Ukraine, or with a negotiation. I'm not sure the Russians aim at destroying totally Ukraine, but if there is no optimal point that emerge from the conflict, or if there is no negotiation, then the Russians will continue to hammer the Ukrainians with missiles. They will probably not enter the region, but they will destroy it from outside somehow. I don't know. I don't know what they have in mind, to be honest, because I think they are facing a dilemma here. So this is something that obviously the Russians don't share with me, especially the general staff. So we don't know exactly where we are, but we understand that we are now in a critical phase. That if we have a discussion, negotiation opening under the auspices of the US, we may save a little bit more of Ukraine that that could be lost if we continue the conflict. I think the maximal line, that's my view. I may be wrong, but that's my personal view, that the maximal line or the deepest Russia will go into Ukraine will be the Dnieper River. They don't want to go beyond that because that would, as I said before, be a completely different conflict, and they don't want to go into that. So we don't know. And the problem I see today is that we see that nobody has shown any, uh, let's say, viable plan or plausible plan to solve the situation. The Ukrainians don't have any. I mean, they still claim that they will have victory, and Russia has to go back to the 1991 borders. The Europeans say that Russia cannot win, which means absolutely nothing. And the US tries to, at this stage, as with what we have heard, but I think Keith Kellogg is now has realized that what he had in mind is not a solution. It is completely outdated, and the idea of freezing the conflict, demilitarized zone, or having peacekeepers and all that is completely off table today. So they will have to initiate a discussion on Russian terms. But beyond that, we cannot exactly say what Zelensky is ready to accept, by the way, because he has a pressure behind himself. He wants apparently to have new elections, and that's probably for him, let's say, a good way of an exit strategy for him. So he could give the baby to another one, and he will be not be associated with the defeat. I'm not sure he will not be considered as responsible of the catastrophe, because at one point people will realize that the conflict was provoked, was intentionally provoked, with the aim of defeating Russia and having then Ukraine into NATO. That's the obsession of Zelensky, and in fact, that's exactly what the reason why it created the tensions in 2021 and early 2022 that forced the Russians to intervene. But and as soon as people will realize this, and I think many Ukrainians have already realized this, you may have another president for Ukraine, but I would be worried about the life of Zelensky. But that's his own problem. But I think a lot of Ukrainians have understood perfectly why this war was made or created, and they will notice that the price paid for it is probably not worth it. And when you talk about the moving the draft age to 18, between 18 and 25, where you have to realize that when you look at the age pyramid of Ukraine, you will see that this particular population between 18 and 25 is the smallest part of the population, because of previous policies, the immigration that happened in the 90s. I mean, the 90s, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if you start taking young people from that part of the population and inject them on the battlefield. And if those people die, that means that the future of Ukraine is just already destroyed, because you don't have the generation that would, uh, let's say, um, be there for reconstructing Ukraine. So this war, that's probably the reason why Zelensky is resisting that. But apparently there are already some preparations, legal preparation, to adopt a law that extend the draft to the 18 to 25 years of age. But again, I don't know. These have been rumors. But if this happens, and if Israeli wants to continue the war, and if we consider that this part of the population is destroyed, this is the end of Ukraine. In fact, probably not geographically, but in terms of demographics.
Carl, the last question would be about the European Union and its future. One of the very important countries in Europe is Germany, and right now we have some sort of competition between AfD and other parties. Recently, Elon Musk started to support AfD, and he talked with the head of AfD on X. And do you see this competition between Soros and Elon Musk? And on one hand, they're trying to, these people are from different ideologies, from different strategies. They're trying to manipulate the situation, domestic policy in Germany. In your opinion, is that of concern for Europeans to be, because at the end of the day, what's important for Europe and the future of Europe should be decided by European people. It's not about the people who are living in the United States and trying to manipulate the situation in Europe.
Well, the problem is that it has become a habit to try and manipulate elections in other countries. And you mentioned Elon Musk and Soros. Soros is obviously used to that and has done that in many countries. And all these color revolutions are probably partly, at least, founded by him. And we have seen also Thierry Breton, who used to be one of the European commissars, that in an interview recently said that they intervened into the Romanian elections in order to cancel the presidential elections that we have seen a couple of weeks ago. So we see that it has become a habit to intervene in foreign countries. I'm personally, regardless of whether it's left or right, I think we should not intervene in other elections. And of course, we have heard about the Russia Gate in the U.S. We have so many gates everywhere. It was some accusation in France and all that. Incidentally, there was a very good an article. I think it was in the Jerusalem Post, or I don't remember, but it was apparently, this is an Israeli firm that manipulates. And in about 30 countries, they have manipulated elections and the mindset of people through Facebook and social networks at large. And that's probably what we have seen in Romania as well. So apparently, those who manipulate that are probably not the countries like Russia and China and all that, but probably other powers, and probably we're back to Israel that tries to manipulate things. But okay, that's another discussion, and probably some people can dig into that. But there was very interesting confession from the director of an Israeli firm who said that he had influenced some some elections. So, in fact, obviously, the technology has helped that with cyber warfare, with social networks and all that. This contributes to create an opacity on how you influence the electors, and that creates a situation where you have some influence. But beyond that, we have today a problem in Europe, that Europe has been, in the last decades or so, has been led by kind of a centrist movement or parties, uh, center left, center right, but more or less they were centered of they were centrist movement. What we have seen developing is a kind of extremist centrism. In You have the far right, you have the far left. Today we have the far center somehow in all these countries, and these these ideologies, these centrist ideologies, which in essence is is not bad, by the way. In essence, the problem is that the people who were in leadership in leadership positions, they were not up to the task. They were essentially amateurs, because this idea, that's exactly what happened in France. For instance, Macron, when he was first elected as president in 2017, wanted to have non-professional politicians, because he thought that the problems were created by those professional politicians, which, by the way, are they are a problem. But the best way to fight the problem was not to bring in people with no experience at all. But that's what happened. And I think in many countries that's what you have. I mean, Annalena Baerbock, I think the best she has done is she was a trampolino artist or something like that. Habeck was a cartoon artist, and things like this. So, meaning that you have people with little, if no experience, with no empathy with the population, which are which exist only in their intellectual bubble. And you see that in the whole of Europe, you have this increasing disconnect between the so-called elites and their population. And having this disconnect has, in fact, created two things. First of all, in order to protect themselves, these elite have become more and more, I would say, extremist, this far centrists, in the sense that they had to suppress freedom to protect themselves, to suppress freedom of expression, to restrict some the existence of some parties. And you mentioned AfD. There was an idea. I don't know how far it would go, but that was this idea that the AfD could be forbidden as a party. That's so we are back to the situation that we had in the Soviet Union, that you authorize only the party that you want to have in the power, and the suppression of the freedom of expression in different forms, the censorship that you have on the social networks, the censorship you have in the mainstream media. All that is a consequence of the inability of the current leadership in explaining what they are doing, in justifying what they are doing, because these people, they just take emotional decisions, but they are not able to justify. This is exactly what you have in Germany, by the way. That if you look, I mentioned Mrs. Annalena Baerbock and Habeck. These are green people. So these guys, they have destroyed the German economy, they have destroyed the German industry, but that was more or less what they had in mind before. So to some extent, they just took advantage of the Ukrainian conflict in order to implement a policy that wants to be greener, so with less industry. They never had in mind how to replace that industry. How do you replace all the jobs that are lost? You see, and okay, you produce less cars in Germany, But does it mean that you solve the problem? No, you just push the problem into somewhere else. And in fact, today you have German cars that are produced in China. And of course, you can increase tariffs against China, but you see, you're in a kind of vicious circle that are dictated by ideology rather than a rationale. And so that's the first aspect of these things. And the second aspect is that by isolating the leadership from the population, you created an incentive for populism to be to be more present. And when you talk about AfD, when you talk about the other party, the Sarah Wagenknecht, which is more left, but if you look in France, it's exactly the same thing. The party of Marine Le Pen, or the opposite, which is the party of the leftist Jean-Luc Mélenchon, these are different forms of populism. You see, so and populism, the problem of populism is that usually it is based on only one idea. They are very often more against something than rather than in favor of something else. And I see the merit of having an opposition, and I think it's good to have an opposition. Whether the opposition that is emerging is the kind of opposition we need is an open question. Again, we don't know. Probably these new parties emerging are wiser than the older ones or the other ones. I don't know, but I'm not sure. You know, the when you are when a party or a ruling party is doing something and you have other parties that are just against him, that's not sufficient. They have to come with a project, with a vision of the society, with a vision of what you want to achieve. Whether these parties, I'm not an expert on German domestic politics, uh, and I'm not sure that the AfD is able to produce a new vision of the German society. If I look on the French side, which I know a little bit better, I can see that even the right wing, like the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen, or the left, they are not able to provide this vision of the country. They are just against the current leadership. And in my view, it's not sufficient to create a future. The future cannot be based on the fact that you're against someone. It has to be to propose a new way, a new approach to problems, a new, not a new ideology, but a new way to approach problems. And I don't see that from neither from the left, either from the nor from the right in France, and I don't see that even in the UK, by the way. So you have this problem here. You fight against something which is obviously ineffective, and the current leadership that we have in Europe, generally speaking, is totally ineffective, is even counterproductive. But is the medicine better than the illness? I'm not sure. And that's an open question in my view. Again, I hope people, as soon as they come to power, they are probably wiser. That's what we can hope. But what is certain is that the current leadership in Europe, generally speaking, that applies to France, Germany, Belgium, UK, Italy, they are not suited for the task, and we see that they are not able to develop an ideas to solve the problem. For instance, with Russia, I mean, we see that we have cut the ties with Russia, but we see that it is a problem. And how do we want to solve that problem? Are we considering having this divide with Russia for the next 50 years, 100 years, 10 years, 2 years? Nobody knows that. Nobody has an approach to that. At least if they express the idea that they have to find new to make new ties with Russia. But the other ones, I mean, if I look at France, for instance, I don't see that at all. So we see that this is this lack of vision, this lack of projection in the future, uh, and in fact, the problem, the reality is, our politicians, they are just concerned by their own election. That's it. That's what they are concerned about. Who to be elected or re-elected. Period. They don't have a vision of what should the country be in 10 or 5 years. We have seen that, and it's not new, and we have seen the development of social networks done by the US with Facebook, Twitter, and all that. We have seen that with China, with TikTok and other. There is no equivalent in Europe, for instance, and we are talking about new technologies. Europe declares itself as a champion for the protection of environment and all that. But who leads the development of EVs, batteries, solar cells? China. You have nothing in Europe, basically. And there is no real incentive. There is no, if you compare the funding of research and development in these matters, we see that China has a tenfold funding for research and development than in Europe. In the last 3 years, it seems that Europe has concentrated all its efforts on how to separate from Russia instead of finding new ways to develop a new Europe. There's absolutely nothing that has been created in the last 3 years, not even in the diplomatic area, in the foreign policy area, but even in domestic policy. There's a lot of intentions to isolate Russia, to stop with this, stop with that, embargo this, sanction that, and all that. But there is absolutely no incentive to say, what do we build instead of this? And that's exactly what I explained with the current government in Germany. They have cut Germany from Russia. Fine, okay. But they had no vision to replace that. You see, we see that you cannot replace the natural gas that was flowing through pipelines from Russia to Germany with LNG. I mean, you can replace with physically, but the cost will be much higher. That means that you lose your competitiveness. Your companies have to close. And this is exactly what's going on. So there was absolutely no vision how you replace what you just discarded. And that shows exactly the nature or the poor quality of the leadership we had. We could have said, okay, we cut from Russia, fine, but at the same time, we'll replace Russia with something else, which is equivalent, that provides the same kind of competitiveness, that we are still able to produce and to compete. But no. And since we are less competitive, what we do is to raise tariffs with China. You are just in a vicious circle. You have to respond by increasing the problem, in fact. And that's exactly what we have. And now, to some extent, with all his, let's say, negative points, Trump has a better vision. because at least he said, what I want is to make America great again. And that will be done at expense of others. And he says it. What is funny is that the others simply accept that. When I say others, I mean Europe and all that. I mean, Europe basically should have the size, the power, the capacity of fighting against, I mean, fighting, not fighting in terms of war, but let's say to compete with the US. It's not even the case. They accept, they know that the development of the US will be at the expense of Europe. And they accept it because they never thought about how to counter that. And that's exactly where we are today. So it's a tragic that we have this kind of leadership without vision, without going beyond the next election term. It's tragic. At the same time, we have the leaders we deserve because we are in democracy. So we elected those people. So if we have a catastrophe, it's probably because we deserve it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
That was my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.